He said, if you help the body to feel safe, the mind starts feeling safe also. You know, when people get really, really traumatized, they can become extremely freaked out, extremely angry, very out of control. Uh, and then, of course, what happens is that we have these systems where our nervous system communicates with each other. And so we have this mirror neuron system. And here you're sitting in front of me and you look really nice and peaceful. And so I go, oh, and your nicefulness and your peacefulness really becomes part of me. And the kinder you look and the sweeter your voice is, the calmer I feel and the safer I feel. You get frightened or fearful, I pick that up and I start mirroring your response.
Mm-hmm.
Before too long, we'll be fighting with each other because that primitive part of our brain gets activated and our frontal lobe will find all kind of excuses why I should hate you. But the back of our brain, the survival brain, is there to help us to survive. And it's very powerful. And so the moment that back of the brain gets the feeling of like, better get out of here or you're going to get killed, your frontal lobe can work like crazy to say, don't do it. But there's enormous power to that back of your brain. And so what we also slowly discover is that the engine of all this is in that survival part of your brain. And then what we discovered, although people have discovered it over and over again in various cultures, is that if you help the body to feel safe, the mind starts feeling safe also. I had my great lesson about that in South Africa when I hang out with Bishop Tutu for a while. That country was about to explode, and the Tutu, Mandela, all those people, they knew like we're going to be born in a country like India that's going to explode the moment it's all over. And so Tutu and the other guys, with Tutu more than anybody else, took it upon himself to try to help people to feel calm and not live by their trauma. And I saw Tutu at work, and it was spectacular. He sang with people, he danced with people, he moved with people, he prayed with people. And just having these people's bodies move together gave you that feeling of safety and containment. There's nothing cognitive about it, but there was a sense of synchrony and safety and pleasure that came through rhythms and movements. And what to me has been interesting is that when you travel around the world, is that people around the world most people have traditions in response to terrible events. People move, sing, and hold each other. But that somehow disappeared in Northern Europe, except during a national tragedy. You get together in your cathedrals and you sing, "Oh God, our help in ages last." And when you sing together, you start feeling calm again. A neuroscientist at NYU called Rodolfo Linus, who really mapped this out and said, in the middle of our brain is a map of the brain. And the map of the brain is a predictive organ. And that if I sit in a TV show and I suddenly start doing weird stuff, that sooner or later somebody's going to cut off the camera. Or if I start yelling at Benjamin, sooner or later Benjamin is going to yell back at me. And so I know that certain actions have certain consequences on the basis of what I've learned. And if you learn somewhere along the line that something may suddenly happen to you and you'll get raped, you'll get destroyed, you get made to feel completely helpless, your brain starts getting ready for something terrible to happen. And you start spending your energy on trying to control yourself before that energy, that explosive emergency part of your brain blows up and you become a defensive person. You spend a lot of time trying to keep control of yourself. And yet, the moment that primitive part of your brain, which basically has no cognition, there's nothing thinking, there's an automatic animal type response, the moment it feels like, oh my God, it's happening again. You start acting as if you're getting hurt, as if you're getting assaulted, etc., etc. And when that happens, you react excessively or you shut yourself down. And not only does it do terrible things to you, in that you start feeling like I cannot control myself. Um, People are doing terrible things to me. I get beleaguered. So you start really getting a very negative idea about yourself. But the world around you starts shunning you because you react in a way that other people don't react. And you become angry, but other people don't become angry, or you shut down when people are dancing and suddenly you behave like a terrified person. And so your whole social environment starts reacting to you like, let's not get involved with this person. So it has major effects on your personality and on your friendship patterns and your social patterns. And so
yes. But and those things that happen to you, I think you say at some point that all trauma is pre-verbal, and trauma is something that you're quite careful in the book to say, look, it doesn't mean that you were run over or you were kidnapped. That it's things like not being fed as a small child,
not being responded to. Yeah.
Yes, and you then take that idea of trauma being something that can happen to a very young child, and you say, before our minds can make the world, that we make the world that we then live in. He says, but before that happens, the world makes our minds.
Yeah.
And it's those early experiences, for you, are those the things then that you could classify as traumas, that they become embedded in the child and manifest them later in life as something?
That's right.
How does that happen?
How does it get embedded?
Yeah, well, first of all, what sort of things are they? And then why do they get embedded?
So trauma basically means a wound. So trauma is when you're wounded and that wound persists and has impact in your life later on. So trauma, this is important to distinguish. Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. So I just came back from Budapest. I was there presenting this book on Hungarian, and this is, I don't know who designs this, but I went, one of the things that I have to do every day is swim. You don't want to talk to me if I haven't swum, and I swam this morning already, it's okay. So in Budapest, I was staying in a hotel, and around the corner there's a swim club where I go swimming every morning. Across the street, directly across the street, as far from us as, say, the second row here, is the building where my mother and I lived when I was 11 months old, and I nearly died there. And she gave me to a stranger in the street on those same paving stones that are still there. And so I didn't see her for 5 or 6 weeks. A lot of people know this story. The trauma wasn't that she gave me to a stranger. The trauma is what I made it mean. Now, any child, what can a child make it mean except that I'm being abandoned? And who gets abandoned? Somebody who's not lovable, somebody who's not wanted. So the trauma then is my sense of not being wanted, not being lovable, not being considered important enough. And now that trauma plays itself out for decades afterwards. So it's not what happened to me as such. Because when you look at it objectively, what happened to me as such was that my mother gave me to a stranger and the stranger took me. Those are both huge acts of love, actually. That's the universe loving this child to take care of it. But that doesn't matter. It's what I make it mean. So the wound is then what happens within us. That gets embedded in the nervous system as emotional memory, not as recollection. I don't recall being given to a stranger by my mother because the parts of the brain that recall aren't even online at that age yet. It doesn't come online until years later. But the emotional memory of being hurt and being abandoned and not being wanted, that's embedded in the nervous system. And then it gets triggered whenever anything even vaguely resembling it later on, decades later, shows up. In fact, if you look at the expression being triggered, It's a really interesting expression. These days we're, trigger warning, don't you triggered me. Well, here's the thing. What can be triggered? For a trigger to do anything, a trigger is a very small little thing. For a trigger to have any impact whatsoever, there has to be an ammunition there has to be explosive charge. So when I get triggered, it's not because somebody did something. It's because what they did happened to set off the explosive charge, the emotional baggage that I'm carrying. So if I carry the emotional baggage of somebody who doesn't have a sense of being wanted and being important, anything later on that reminds me of that will trigger me and drive my behavior. So that's how trauma works. It's embedded in the nervous system, in the brain, in the form of emotional subverbal memory.
Nothing you...
By the way, I'm sorry to say one more thing. It's also embedded in the body. So many of you will have had the experience, or if you're a body worker, like a massage therapist and so on, you go to a massage therapist, they touch you in a certain part of the body, and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed by emotion. You've had that experience? So that's the body, as Bessel says, Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score. So the trauma is embedded also in the muscles and in the connective tissues and the nerves. So attachment, that's fine. But then we have this other need that's that's also determined by evolution, which is, I call authenticity, and just auto the self's authenticity, being in touch with ourselves, being in touch with our feelings and our bodies and our emotions. I know last time I spoke here, I think I asked the same question, but let me do it again. I think I did. If you've had the experience of having a strong gut feeling about something and ignoring it and then being sorry afterwards, just raise your hand, okay? Well, see, the vast majority. What you're telling me here is about your childhood. Because gut feelings are essential for survival. We evolved out there in nature. For millions of years, the humanoid ancestors of our species lived out there in nature, as did our own species live out in nature for most of our existence as a species. Like out of the 150, 200,000 years that Homo sapiens has walked the earth, if that can be represented in 1 hour, then until about 5 minutes ago, we lived out there in nature. How long does any creature in nature survive if they're not in touch with their gut feelings? So that being in touch with our bodies and our emotions is essential also. Terrific. But what happens is if for the sake of fitting with the family or with a culture that doesn't particularly support our authenticity, we have to give up our connection to ourselves, our authenticity, for the sake of attachment. Then being inauthentic, being out of touch with ourselves, is how we survive. We're afraid to be ourselves because we associate being ourselves with a threat of being rejected. And so this means that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be in relationships where we're afraid to be ourselves, to really say what it feels like for us. Now that has terrific implications. When I say terrific, I mean significant implications. A study I quote in the book, they followed 2,000 women over 10 years. Over a 10-year period, those women who were unhappily married and didn't express their feelings were 4 times as likely to die as those women who were unhappily married, but they did talk about their feelings. So that inauthenticity, which is not a moral judgment on my part, it's something people do in order to survive their childhoods, but that exacts a major cost in terms of physical and mental health, not to mention your relationships, where you're afraid to be yourself, where you're in a relationship and you don't even, your partner doesn't even know you because you're afraid to be yourself. So you feel alone even when you're partnered, because if you're not known, you're going to feel alone. Doesn't matter how many people surround you. So, the price that we pay for inauthenticity is huge, and yet so many of us survived our childhood, and when you put your hand up, I mean, have you ever met a 1-day-old baby that wasn't in touch with their gut feelings? I'm tired and I'm hungry and I'm uncomfortable and I'm wet, but mom and dad are working so hard, I better not cry, come on, In other words, when you put your hand up, something happened between the day you were born and a few years later when you no longer listen to your gut feelings because you couldn't afford to. Something happened.
In a way, one of the things which come across very strongly, especially in the early part of the book, is that we tend to think that children learn things when we teach them, when they get to school, or when we can have a conversation with them. And very strongly in the book, what comes across is that children become who they are and learn their first moral language, as it were, before any of that. In other words, if you think to yourself, I shall wait until the child can speak and then I'll teach them, it's too late. They've already learned everything from what you did or didn't do.
Yeah, that's right. So that and as a parent, because I was quite out of touch with myself and based on my own history, I was never comfortable playing with kids. I kept thinking, well, once they learn language, because I'm good at words, you see. So I thought once they learn language, then I'll be able to. But I missed the whole point, is that the real development happens before words even come along. The emotional part of the brain, the holistic, you might say more feminine, although it's not gender determined at all, holistic emotional part of the brain, the right side of the brain, both in terms of the evolution of the species, but also in terms of the development of the individual. The right side of the brain, the emotional brain, develops first. And it's the template for everything. If we get the right side of the brain right, the left brain will follow very nicely. If we don't get the right side of the brain, if we don't establish the emotional relationships which children require for healthy development, then they might become very intellectually developed on the left brain side, but they'll be very underdeveloped. There won't be a proper template for it. And then they're going to be professors and all that kind of stuff, you know. Or philosophers, I don't know. Or medical doctors, for that matter. So that in this culture, the left brain really rules. But the left brain, divorced from a healthy emotional underpinning, where does it get us? It gets us to where we are, which is, we're the only species that creates environments that are destructive to its own species. That's what the left brain has got us, because the right brain is underdeveloped.
And it can't speak. I mean, you can't, in some way you don't have verbal access to the lessons, that first language you learned by the time you were 6 months old. So how does that part of us speak to us when we won't listen?
It speaks to us through our, see, here's the thing, here's the other thing. We think that we have this one brain up here. And what's a brain? A brain interprets stimuli from the environment, processes them, and responds. That's what a brain does. So yeah, we have the cerebrum up here. But there's also, it turns out, there's a brain connected to the heart. There's a nervous system that surrounds the heart, which is in communication with this brain here. And of course the gut has been called the second brain. The gut has some more neurochemicals than the brain does in some ways. And gut feelings are not luxuries, as we've demonstrated. They're actually a form of knowledge. So the gut is processing stimuli from the environment. When these three brains are in sync with each other, then you have true wisdom, then you have true awareness. When this one is unmoored from the other two, you can have all kinds of logic and all kinds of science and all kinds of technology, but you're not going to have wisdom.